Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Google Pixel 5 and see how it holds up in 2022. Now this phone originally came out in September 30th of 2020, and what I can tell you is that this phone I think is still a very good phone to pick up. Luckily for us, when this phone first came out, it was in a really interesting spot. It wasn't the most expensive phone of all time. It wasn't even the most expensive Pixel phone, but I really liked it because it kind of undercut some of the market, which was really good, and it was a very good phone for the price. Although this phone did lack a couple of flagship features even from like 2020 standards, it was a competitively priced phone, and this is a really good example of a phone that is a good phone. You know, it's not a bad phone. It's a good phone because of its price tag. If this phone was $1,000 phone, that would have been a horrible deal. But because this thing was several $100s less than that, it was around the same price of, competitive phones of this caliber, and I was really happy about it. You can buy this phone right now for probably around $400, $500 in the used market, especially less than that if you want to go like the eBay route. I will leave links in the description if you want to pick them up from Amazon. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, the body of the Pixel 5 was a very interesting design. From the Pixel 4 to the Pixel 5, and this was actually a pretty big design change in my opinion. Although it did stem kind of from the Pixel 4a, this design with the hole punch display and its beautiful 6-inch OLED panel, I was a humongous fan of it, and I still think this phone holds up really well. And the fact that the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro kind of stemmed the Pixel 5 to a more flagship, competitor and like a more flagship series, I appreciate the Pixel 5, although I do think the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro are probably better phones now. Now you do have a 90Hz panel on it too, which I am completely here for it. 120Hz would have been really cool, but in 2020, really the main people who were doing 120Hz was Samsung. There were obviously other, like OnePlus and everybody else, but 90Hz is still good, especially for this thing not being like a, $1,000 phone. You have USB Type-C port on the bottom. You had the aluminum frame on this phone and an aluminum back. Now this phone feels a little bit different. It doesn't really feel super premium, compared to even like an iPhone 12 this time, but it's still a premium feeling phone, and I don't think it necessarily feels cheap anymore. Now we do have a dual camera setup on the back, but there were things like IP certification on this phone, which was really good to have. You also had, wireless charging on this phone too, and you had reverse charging. You didn't have reverse wireless charging, but still, wireless charging and reverse charging is still really cool things to have too. So in terms of the outside, I was really happy with the way this phone felt, and I'm still really happy with the way this phone still kind of holds up in 2022, at least on the exterior. Now camera wise, this was kind of an interesting thing that Pixel did, or Google did. So with the Pixel lineup, Google was notorious of pretty much having the best cameras of that time. At least for like the first 2 generations, they were like top tier. Then with the Pixel 3 XL, they kind of dropped the ball with the design, and that kind of stemmed down to the camera too. And then with the Pixel 4 and 4 XL, there was no 4K 60 on the back. There was no ultra-wide sensor, and with some of the comments Google made, it was kind of a floppy camera in some ways. Nobody looks back at the Pixel 4 and 4 XL and think about those phones as like the best cameras of that year. With the Pixel 5, they dropped that telephoto lens, they added an ultra-wide sensor, so even though it has a dual camera setup, it's still a really good setup in my opinion. 12.2 megapixel wide-angle lens, then a 16 megapixel ultra-wide sensor. So that type of setup is still kind of decent in 2022. I will say for a 2020 phone, it's about, approaching 2 years old now, it's pretty much on par with something like an iPhone 12, although I think the iPhone 12 is definitely better. This thing, again, for its price tag and everything, I think it's a pretty decent priced phone for that type of camera. Now, you only have an 8 megapixel wide angle lens on the front where you can only do 1080p video on. I like having the ability of shooting 4K at 60 on the front, so that does kind of take an L there. But another thing I don't really like too much about Pixel phones is that the stock camera applications really aren't that capable. They have a lot of cool things built in with them, but there's not really a lot of features compared to Samsung cameras. So that was another thing that I'm not too big of a fan of. Beyond than just the video resolutions you can film in, it would still be really nice to have a lot more capability built in. And with something like the Pixel 5, I think it kind of sits at an interesting spot. Not the best camera, not the worst camera, but definitely if you're willing to download other camera applications, you can get a much better experience on this type of phone. So I would say the camera is a thumbs up in my opinion. Again, not perfect, but it definitely gets the job done. And I would consider it more of a pro than a con in my opinion. Now moving on to probably one of the best things about this phone, this device does have stock Android pretty much built in, so there's not a lot of bloatware, there's not a lot of random stuff, kind of sprinkled throughout this phone, so there's not a lot of like stock applications that, you probably won't already be using. So with Samsung phones, I'm sure you all know, there's a lot of random stuff built in. Xiaomi phones and Huawei phones are also like this, but with Google phones, I mean, they don't really have a lot of stuff like this. They're pretty much the iPhones of Androids, and I think everyone kind of knows this by now, and I do think nowadays it probably means less about stock Android than ever before. I feel like One UI has pretty much kind of gotten, better. I'm still a fan of stock Android and I still prefer it, but because of some of the optimizations that Samsung is doing, especially with some of the capability and more customizability options, I kind of like, One UI phones too, but with stock Android, I kind of like them a little bit more, to be honest. Now, you still have things like, smoothness and day one updates, so once an update comes out, this thing will be supported. And one thing I do like about pretty much all the Pixel lineups, including the Pixel 5, is that all of these phones will pretty much be getting the same day updates for quite a bit of time. With Samsung's, even if they last the longest, the same time, the Samsung Galaxy S22 is going to get an update, then the S21, then the S20, and it's going to like sprinkle down on different dates. I never like that at all. Whereas on this type of Android setup, once the Pixel 6 gets an update, the Pixel 5 will also get an update. So kind of cool. For the next couple of years, these things will be supported, and you also have like, custom ROM capability with this type of device too, which is always really good to have. So in terms of the software, thumbs up. In terms of performance, this phone's performance is still actually pretty decent. And like I mentioned, it's not like top tier. I don't think it's going to like wow anybody anymore in terms of, feeling it and picking it up when you compare it to maybe even like a Pixel 6, but it is still a very smooth and fast phone in my opinion. Yeah, the Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G chipset inside of it with 8GB of RAM, only one model of this phone. And again, like I mentioned, I think the performance and just everything about this phone is really good for its price tag, and I think it's kind of held up pretty well throughout the last couple of, years. It's really only been out for like a little bit less than 2 years, but it's still a very decent performing phone. And one thing I've always done is compare this phone against every single phone, major phone that comes out for the last, since it's been released. I compared it to the iPhone 12s, the 13s, the Galaxy S21, the Galaxy S22 more recently, and I think this is a very good performing phone when compared to those things. I wasn't expecting expecting too much from this phone because it didn't even have the 88 of this time, or the 855 or 865 that this phone should have had, but still the 765 surprised me, and I think it's still a decent performing phone. It's definitely not bad, and I think that's kind of the best way to put it. It's a good performing phone for the price tag, and I think for a lot of people out there, that 90Hz is going to make this phone feel a little bit smoother as well. So I think when it comes down to the performance section of this phone, thumbs up for me. Maybe it could be better, but I think, for sure it still holds up very well. In terms of battery life, 4080 mAh battery on this thing too, and like I mentioned, very good size battery on this thing. I had a really good battery life on this thing as well, and even now when I pick it up, I do have Android 12 on it. I plan on installing Android 13 once it comes in like a pretty stable beta. Maybe it'll be better in battery life, I'm not 100% too sure, but I think as of right now, the battery life on this device is a very, very good pro of this device too. Again, could it be better? Could it have reverse wireless charging, those types of things? Absolutely, but I still think the way this phone is situated now makes this battery life pretty decent in my opinion. Better on the, more on the better things for sure. And ultimately, I think the Google Pixel 5 is still completely worth it in 2022. I think it's a very capable phone with a ton of capability, and the future of this thing is bright. It may not last as long as the Google Tensor chipset devices like the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, but I think this phone is at a very interesting spot. I think the future of this device looks great, and I'm excited for it for sure. If you have the money, go for the Pixel 6 or 6 Pro, but I think this thing is still a very capable machine for sure. So that kind of covers it. If you have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.